somewhere deep in the old villages of Vietnam, where the river never sleeps and incense smoke drifts through every doorway. People whisper of souls that refuse to leave their bodies. They say the dead sometimes find a way back, borrowing the flesh of the living, breathing again through lungs that were never theirs. But when the line between the living and the dead fades, how can you tell who's truly alive and who's only borrowing life? This story begins with a funeral and a woman who didn't want to stay dead. Chapter 1. The Woman by the River. The funeral ended on the 5th night. The air smelled of incense and rain-soaked soil. Mother's coffin had already been taken away, but inside the house, the smell of burnt sandalwood still lingered, thick, heavy, as if she had never truly left. That night, as I sat alone in the empty living room, the wind outside howled, dragging through the cracks of the old wooden doors. The candlelight flickered, the shadows on the wall swayed like living things. From the direction of the river came the faint sound of someone crying. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then, the cry became clearer, soft, choking, filled with pain. "Don't bury me yet?" The voice was that of a woman. Hoarse, broken, and so close that it felt like it came from right outside the door. The next morning, I asked the villagers. Old Madame Nam, who lived across from the riverbank, sighed. "Greater than, you shouldn't have gone near that river last night. That place isn't clean. Years ago, a woman died there, drowned. Her body was never found, only her head." She paused, lowered her voice. "Greater than, people say that every year, around this time, when someone dies near the full moon, her spirit follows them home, asking to borrow their body, to live again." I laughed weakly, pretending not to care, but my hands were cold. That night, when I burned incense for my mother again, the flame suddenly bent toward the door. From the darkness outside, I thought I saw a woman standing in the yard. Her long hair clung wetly to her face, her clothes dripping river water. When I blinked, she was gone. Only the muddy footprints remained, leading from the door to the altar, and stopped right where my mother's photograph stood. Greater than, there are spirits that never rest, Madame Nam said. When a soul dies in anger, it looks for a body, any body, still warm enough to hold it. Chapter 2. The Unfinished Burial. That night, the rain didn't stop. The wind beat against the eaves like hands knocking on a coffin. Inside, the candles on my mother's altar bent one way, their flames quivering. The photo frame rattled slightly on its own, even though the windows were shut tight. I leaned closer. Behind the photograph, I noticed a thin piece of folded paper, old and yellowed. When I opened it, the ink had almost faded, only one sentence remained clear enough to read. Greater than, if the body isn't buried completely, the soul won't stay buried either. The handwriting was my mother's. The next day, I went to the graveyard. The mound was still damp from the rain. Fresh earth, black and soft, with thin trails where the water had carved down through it. But when I looked closer, I froze. Someone had drawn a circle in the mud, a perfect circle, and inside it, 3 dots arranged in a triangle. Right in the center of the grave. It hadn't been there yesterday. Old caretaker Mr. Bay walked by, squinting at me. Greater than, you shouldn't be here yet, boy. When a coffin sinks too deep before the 3rd day, the ground breathes. The ground breathes? I asked. He spat out his beetle juice, then said slowly, "Greater than, that means something under there is still moving." That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of dripping water echoed from the hallway. When I went to check, the floor was wet. A trail of muddy footprints led from the door all the way to my room. At the end of the trail, someone had written with a finger on the damp wall, "Greater than, not yet finished." The words were fresh, the mud still moist. I felt my knees go weak. Outside, the rain had stopped, but I still heard the river running. Loud and restless, as if something beneath it was clawing its way up. Greater than, the dead don't always stay where we bury them. Madame Nam once told me. Some of them are just waiting for a body still warm enough to borrow. Chapter 3. The Cry Beneath the Floor. 3 days after the burial, the smell in the house began to change. The scent of incense and sandalwood was gone, replaced by something faintly sour. Damp, like old river water left too long in a jar. At night, I heard it again, the soft sound of someone crying. But this time, it wasn't coming from the river. It was coming from beneath the floor. The house was built on old wooden planks, with hollow space underneath. When I lay still, I could hear every creak, every small shift in the wood, but that night, I heard something else. The floorboards breathed. Between each sob, I heard the boards expand and contract. Slow, heavy, like lungs filled with mud. Dash dash dash. I lit a candle and crouched down, pressing my ear to the floor. At first, only silence. Then, a faint voice, hoarse and gurgling, as if the speaker's throat was full of water. Greater than, "It's cold, too cold down here." My blood froze. I dropped the candle. The wax spilled onto the wood and hardened instantly. The flame flickered out, but I could still hear the voice. It wasn't whispering anymore. Greater than, "Don't leave me. I'm still here." The words came from right beneath where my mother's bed had been. Dash dash dash. The next morning, I went to see Madame Nam again. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. Greater than, "The soul you hear is trapped in between. It hasn't accepted death yet, and the ground below your house, that's where its breath lies. It's trying to borrow a body to rise again." I asked what to do. She said quietly, "Greater than, wait, when the 7th night comes, it will call your name. Whatever you do, don't answer." Dash dash dash. The 7th night came faster than I thought. The wind rose, and the air turned thick. I lay on my bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The crying started again, now mixed with the creaking of wood, like someone crawling under the floor. Then came the whisper. Familiar. Close. Greater than, "Son." My heart stopped. That voice, it was my mother's. Greater than, "Son, open the door, it's cold outside." I shut my eyes tight, biting my lips till they bled. The boards below me groaned, swelling upward. Something pressed up from underneath, slow and deliberate. And then, for the briefest moment, I felt a finger, wet, cold, trembling, slide through the crack in the floor and brush against my foot. Dash dash dash. Greater than, some souls knock gently before they come in. Others just find their own way. Chapter 4. The Return of the Headless Woman. The 7th night came and went. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. On the 8th night, the house grew cold again. The smell of damp earth returned, stronger than before. The windows trembled, and the flame on the altar bent sharply toward the door, as if drawn by invisible breath. I held the incense sticks in my hand, trying to calm my shaking. Just then, I heard footsteps on the front porch, soft, deliberate, heavy with water. And then, a knock. 3 knocks. Slow. Measured. Greater than, "Son." The voice was hoarse, muffled, like someone speaking through a cloth. My heart stopped. It was the same voice as the night beneath the floor. Greater than, "Son, open the door, it's Mother." But the way she said it, flat, dragging each syllable, didn't sound human anymore. Dash dash dash. I backed away. The knock came again, harder this time. The candle on the altar flickered violently, then went out. In the darkness, I heard the latch move. The door creaked open, even though I hadn't touched it. Moonlight spilled into the room, and in it stood a woman, her clothes dripping wet, water pooling at her feet. Her hair hung long, covering her face completely. When she lifted her head, my throat closed. There was no face. Just darkness where a head should have been. A void that shimmered faintly, like river water under moonlight. She stepped inside. The floor creaked under her bare feet. Each step left a dark footprint that didn't fade. She stopped at the altar, in front of my mother's photograph. The incense smoke coiled upward, wrapping around her like mist. Then she turned toward me. Though she had no eyes, I could feel her gaze, cold, wet, Heavy, like the bottom of the river. Greater than, you have her smell. The voice gurgled. Warm enough to borrow? Dash dash dash. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. The woman's body trembled, then began to twist, the wet cloth on her shoulders tightening. Something inside her neck shifted upward, as if pushing against the skin from within. Then, from that darkness, a shape began to form. A face. Not hers. My mother's. Half formed, half floating, as if stitched from memory. Her lips moved, whispering. Greater than, let me stay. Just a little longer. Dash dash dash. The next thing I knew, I was outside, lying in the mud, rain pouring down. The house behind me was silent, all lights out. But through the window, I could see the altar. The photo of my mother was gone. In its place stood a wet mirror, fogged and trembling, as if something inside it was still breathing. Dash dash dash. Greater than, they say a spirit without a head cannot cross to the other side. It must borrow another's, even if that head is still alive. Chapter 5. The diary in the drawer. After that night, I didn't dare stay in the house anymore. But something kept pulling me back, not fear, not curiosity, but a strange, heavy ache, as if a part of me was still trapped inside. At dawn, I returned. The floor was dry, no footprints, no water stains. Everything looked normal, too normal. Like the house had spent the whole night pretending nothing happened. I went to my mother's old room. The bed was neatly made, the altar clean. But when I opened the drawer by the bedside, I found a small leather notebook, bound in red thread. It was old, brittle, and smelled faintly of mold and sandalwood. Inside were dates, years of them, each one followed by short, neat notes in my mother's handwriting. At first, they looked ordinary. Greater than, July 12th, the river rose higher than usual. August 4th, the incense burned backward again. But as I turned the pages, the words changed. Her handwriting grew shaky. And then, one entry stopped my breath. Greater than, the ritual succeeded. The body accepted the soul. But the spirit must return every 20 years. Dash dash dash. I flipped to the next page. There, a single word was written in red ink, pressed so hard the paper tore slightly. Greater than, H. Just the letter. No explanation. Beneath it, a line scrawled hastily, almost unreadable. Greater than, she came to me in the rain. Said she couldn't cross. I gave her warmth. Dash dash dash. I sat frozen for a long time. My mother, gentle, quiet, kind, had written this. But what did it mean? Who was H? Then, near the back of the notebook, I found a dried lotus petal tucked between two pages. Under it, in faded ink, greater than, to borrow a body. The soul must find flesh still warm. When the body cools, it is too late. Life must be exchanged for life. Dash dash dash. I dropped the notebook, my hands trembling. As it hit the floor, a folded piece of paper slipped out, not old, but new, crisp, freshly written in red. It read, greater than, tonight, she will return for what she gave. The warmth is fading. Dash dash dash. Greater than, some secrets are written not to be read, but to make sure someone will find them too late. Chapter 6. The body that never grew cold. The next morning, the sky was gray and heavy with mist. From the riverbank, I could still smell the water, thick, muddy, full of decay. That was where, years ago, people had found the body of the woman named H. The earth there was always cold, even when the sun shone. As I stood over it, I remembered what Madame Nam had said. Greater than, she was strong. Child, too strong. The body was buried, but the soul refused to leave. Maybe her body still isn't cold down there. The thought sent a chill through me. If her body wasn't cold, what was it waiting for? Dash dash dash. That afternoon, I visited the old caretaker, Mr. Bay. He was half blind, his skin darkened by age, his voice slow and thick. When I asked him about the woman who drowned 20 years ago, he frowned. Greater than, not one body. Son, he said after a pause. 2 died that night. A woman lost her head, and a man lost his body. Only his head was ever found, floating near the temple dock. I stared at him. He continued, his eyes far away. Greater than, they were lovers. Forbidden. She jumped into the river first. He followed. In the morning, all they found was the man's head, tangled in the reeds. His eyes were still open. A weight settled in my chest. When I got home, I opened my mother's diary again. On one of the older pages, almost hidden in the crease, I saw a faint line of writing I hadn't noticed before. Greater than, they died together. 1 body, 2 souls. ... That night, I searched through the drawer again. The notebook was there, but this time, a new page had appeared between the old ones. The paper was clean and white, the ink still wet. It said, greater than, do not let the body grow cold. When the flesh cools, the soul leaves. To live again, borrow it while it's still warm. Below the words was a drawing, a circle, with 3 dots in the middle. The same symbol I'd seen carved into the grave. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Could it be, on the night they drowned, my mother found that man's body, still warm, and borrowed it to live? ... The rain started again. The sound of water on the roof grew louder, sharper. I looked down, the notebook's cover was wet, and a dark red streak appeared on it. I wiped it with my sleeve and froze. It wasn't ink. It was fresh blood. A sound came from the back of the house, a faint moan. Almost human. I turned toward the door. The floor was wet again, muddy footprints trailing toward the altar. On the altar, my mother's photo had reappeared. But the face in it wasn't hers anymore. It was a man's face, pale, his neck bruised dark purple. I stumbled backward. Then, from somewhere behind me, a hoarse whisper filled the room. Greater than, I never had time to grow cold. I spun around. No one. Only the lingering chill of breath down my neck. ... I ran straight to Madame Nam's house. Before I could speak, she said softly, as if she'd been expecting me. Greater than, she didn't just borrow a woman's body, child. She borrowed a man's too. The soul inside your mother wasn't 1. It was 3. I asked, trembling. Greater than 3 souls? Why? Madame Nam looked toward the dark river and whispered. Greater than, because one must die, so another can live. And this time, she may have chosen you. ... That night, I dreamt of 3 figures standing around my bed. My mother, the headless woman, and the man with the bruised neck. Their voices overlapped into one. Greater than, let us borrow, 1 more time. Just to live again. ... Greater than when a body has not yet gone cold. The gate between the living and the dead remains open. And through that gate, not just 1 soul can pass, but many. Chapter 7, The Summoning. Madame Nam said there was only one way to know which soul was haunting the house. We had to summon it. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed fear. Greater than, the ritual must be done at the hour of the rat. She warned. The 7th night after the burial, when the boundary between yin and yang opens. No matter what you see, no matter who calls your name, do not answer. Do not touch them. I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. I needed to know. Who was truly living inside my mother's body all those years? ... That night, the rain returned, heavy, endless. Inside the house, we lit 3 red candles and 7 sticks of incense. Madame Nam arranged the offerings on the mat. A bowl of rice, a bowl of salt, 3 eggs, a cup of chicken blood, and a broken comb, the one belonging to the woman from the river. The room smelled of smoke and damp feathers. I sat in the corner, clutching the talisman she'd given me, my hands slick with sweat. Madame Nam began to chant, her voice low and steady, like the rhythm of flowing water. Greater than, Nguyen Ti Tuyet, if your spirit still lingers. Show yourself, speak your last words. The candles wavered. The air thickened. Then, a sudden gust of wind blew through the closed windows. The central candle snuffed out. And from the swirling smoke, A hoarse voice echoed. Greater than, don't call me. Dash dash dash. My stomach turned. The voice wasn't my mother's. It was deeper, raspier, the voice of a man. Madame Nam didn't flinch. She chanted faster, louder. The broken comb began to tremble on the mat. The 3 eggs cracked open one by one. The yolks spilled out, thick and yellow, mixing with the blood. The smell was sickly, sweet and iron. Greater than, who are you? Madame Nam shouted. Name yourself. The voice came again, this time, whispering right beside my ear. Greater than, my name is Locke. I froze. The mirror on the altar shimmered. A face appeared, pale, waterlogged, the neck bruised deep purple. His eyes stared straight into mine. Greater than, I never had time to grow cold. Madame Nam grabbed her talisman and threw it toward the altar. The candles flared back to life, their flames rising high, red and furious. The room filled with thick smoke. In the center of the mat, the broken comb shattered into pieces. The chicken blood began to boil, bubbling black. A shape emerged from the smoke, my mother's body, twisting and convulsing. Her face flickered between 3 forms. The woman from the river, the man with the bruised neck, and my mother. Greater than, 3 souls are fighting for one body. Madame Nam screamed. Cover your ears, don't listen. But I already heard them. 3 voices overlapping into one terrible cry. Greater than, to live. To borrow. Time is up. Dash dash dash. The air exploded. I fell backward, my ears ringing, my chest burning. When I opened my eyes, Madame Nam was on the floor, coughing blood. She grasped my hand, her voice shaking. Greater than, it's not over. The 3 souls are searching for a new vessel. If you don't leave this house, they'll choose you. Dash dash dash. That night, I dreamed again. 3 figures standing around my bed, whispering in unison. Greater than, one more time. Let us live through you. Dash dash dash. Greater than when a summoning fails. The spirit isn't banished. It simply finds another place to stay. Chapter 8. The Locked Room. The room sat at the very end of the hallway, behind the kitchen. All my life, Mother had forbidden me from going near it. She always kept it locked, the key tied to her belt. When I once asked why, she said only, greater than, it's a room for the dead, not for the living. But there were no other dead in our family. Only the 2 of us. Dash dash dash. After the failed summoning, Madame Nam lay weak and feverish. Before slipping into sleep, she whispered, greater than, there's still something inside your house that isn't at rest. In the last room, you'll find what holds the soul in place. Those words wouldn't leave my head. By dusk, I was standing before that locked door. The metal lock was rusted, the wood swollen from years of moisture. I hesitated, hand trembling on the cold metal. Then I found an old chisel in the shed. With one sharp blow, the lock snapped. The moment the door creaked open, a gust of freezing air hit my face. It smelled of rot and old incense, a mix of blood and wet earth. Dash dash dash. I raised my flashlight. The beam cut through thick dust and spiderwebs. The walls were dark, stained with uneven marks. Black smears shaped like handprints. In the center stood a bamboo bed, its mat sunken deep in the middle. As if someone had lain there for years without moving. I stepped closer. The mat was printed with a faint human outline, darker than the rest. And stuck to it were strands of long, black hair, matted into the straw like something once melted there. When the wind slipped through the broken shutters, the mat rustled softly, like someone breathing beneath it. At the head of the bed stood a small wooden table. On it sat a glass jar filled with thick, dark liquid. I leaned closer and froze. Inside the jar floated a lock of hair, a fingernail, and a piece of bone. A human fingertip. Beneath the jar was a sheet of yellowed paper. The handwriting unmistakable, my mother's. Greater than, November 4th, the ritual complete. The body accepted the soul. The merging was successful. Dash dash dash. I stumbled backward, bile rising in my throat. Then, a faint creak came from the far corner. I turned the flashlight. There was an old wardrobe, its door slightly ajar. I reached out and pulled it open. Inside hung a tiny wooden coffin, the kind made for a newborn child. On its lid was an old talisman. The ink faded, but I could still make out 3 words. Greater than, borrowed, body, alive. My knees gave out. Mother had said I was born lifeless. That I didn't cry until hours later. Now I understood. I wasn't born, I was borrowed. I sank to the floor, tears mixing with cold sweat. Then, from the bamboo bed, came the sound of straw shifting. Slowly, the sunken spot in the mat began to rise, as if something underneath was sitting up. The beam of my flashlight trembled. A gray, lifeless hand slipped out from beneath the mat. Its nails black, the skin cracked and dry. Greater than, give it back. The voice was a rasp, coming from under the bed. The hand clawed upward, leaving black streaks on the mat. I staggered out of the room and slammed the door shut. The moment it closed, something inside struck the door hard, rattling the hinges. Then came silence, and 5 black fingerprints burned into the wood. I stood there, frozen, heart hammering. After a long while, everything went quiet again. Only the sound of rain returned, gentle, almost peaceful. But as I turned away, I heard it. A faint whisper from behind the locked door. Greater than, don't lock me in. I just want to live. One more time? Greater than, some rooms are not sealed to keep things inside, but to keep the living from finding what should never be found. Chapter 9. The Possession. Ever since the night I opened that room, something in me changed. I could no longer sleep. Whenever I closed my eyes, I dreamt of lying on that bamboo bed, the straw shifting beneath me, and a cold hand gently wrapping around my wrist. When I woke up, there were bruises on my arm. 5 dark marks, shaped like fingers. The mirror became my enemy. Each morning, when I looked into it, the person staring back at me wasn't quite the same. My eyes looked sharper, deeper, almost unfamiliar. My lips had lost their color. And sometimes, when I smiled to test myself, the reflection would smile a second later. The first time it happened, I froze. Then I tried again, and again. But every time, it was slightly delayed, like the reflection was thinking first. That night, I heard a whisper behind me while standing in front of the mirror. Greater than, don't fight it. You've borrowed my body long enough. I spun around, nothing. But in the mirror, I saw myself still facing forward and smiling. The next morning, I went to the river. The water was calm but dark, the surface broken by floating leaves. When I looked down, my reflection didn't move with me. Instead, another face surfaced beneath mine. A man's face, pale, with bruises around his neck. His lips parted underwater, forming words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, slipped, and fell. When I crawled up the muddy bank, I saw a crescent-shaped scar, etched into my palm, as if something had grabbed me from below. I remembered what Madame Nam once said. Greater than, when a borrowed soul starts to reclaim its body, the host will bear its mark. That evening, I burned incense for my mother. The flames flickered violently, and the smoke rose backward, curling down toward the ground. I heard the floorboards groan, and the whisper returned, layered this time. A chorus of 3 voices. Greater than, let us stay. 1 body, 3 souls. My vision blurred. When I came to, I was sitting in the middle of the yard, surrounded by half-burnt talismans and the carcass of a chicken, its blood drawn into a perfect circle on the ground. I didn't remember doing any of it. The next day, people in the village started looking at me strangely. An old woman whispered to her neighbor, Greater than, doesn't he look exactly like Mrs. Tuyet now? The same eyes, the same smile. That night, I looked into the mirror again. The resemblance was undeniable. The face staring back was no longer mine. It was my mother's. But the eyes, those were someone else's. At 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps. I got up, but when I moved, my feet made no sound. As I walked through the hallway, the mirror at the end reflected me. Except the reflection turned around and looked back. It grinned and whispered, "Greater than, now it's my turn to live." I tried to scream, but my throat tightened. My hands lifted on their own and pressed against my neck, squeezing until my vision went black. Just before I lost consciousness, I heard the whisper again, this time from inside my own head. "Greater than, one body isn't enough for 3 souls. We must choose who stays." When I woke up, I was in the village clinic. Madame Nam sat by my side, pale and trembling. "Greater than, you stopped breathing for nearly 2 minutes," she said. "You strangled yourself. The spirits have already entered you." I tried to speak, but my voice came out strange. Lower, slower, not my own. "Greater than, if they've taken my body?" I asked. "Then who am I now?" Madame Nam didn't answer right away. Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Greater than, maybe you were never just you, child. Maybe you were one of them all along." Greater than, when the soul weakens, the body becomes an empty house. And an empty house never stays empty for long. Chapter 10. The Wandering Souls. Ever since the possession, I stopped feeling hunger or thirst. I could go for days without food, without sleep. When I looked at my hands, the veins seemed darker, and my skin had taken on the pale gray of wet clay. Madame Nam called it the after-breath. "Greater than, your body's still alive," she said, "but your soul hasn't fully returned. You're walking on the edge of both worlds." At night, I began to see them. Shadows moving along the riverbank. Figures without faces drifting past the windows. They never looked directly at me, but I could feel their eyes, hollow and searching. Once, I followed them down to the river. The moonlight glimmered on the surface, and there they were, dozens of shapes. Men, women, children, kneeling by the water, whispering prayers to no one. When the wind passed through them, their bodies rippled like mist, but their reflections remained on the water, clearer than their forms above it. A woman stood at the far end of the shore, her long hair dripping, her white dress clinging to her skin. Even before she turned, I knew who she was. Greater than, mother. Her head tilted slightly, her face half hidden by the shadow of her hair. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Greater than, you shouldn't have opened the door. That room was keeping them in, not keeping you out." I stepped closer. "Greater than, what are they?" "Greater than, wandering souls," she said. "Those who borrowed life, but never returned it." Her hand reached out, thin and shaking. For a moment, I felt the warmth of it. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were not hers anymore. "Greater than, you are one of us now." I stumbled backward, the mud cold beneath my feet. The figures around her turned, their faces blank, their mouths opening in unison. From their throats came a sound like rushing wind. "Greater than, borrowed. Borrowed. Borrowed." The river began to boil. Steam rose, and beneath the surface, hands pressed upward, hundreds of them, reaching, clawing, trembling. I ran. The ground seemed to sink beneath me, and every shadow I passed whispered my name. Not in anger, but in hunger. When I reached home, the mirror by the altar was fogged again. In its haze, I saw the same woman standing behind me. Wet, pale, her mouth moving silently. I wiped the mirror, and realized it wasn't fog. It was breath, coming from the other side. That night, as I tried to sleep, I felt someone sit on the edge of my bed. The air grew colder, and a whisper brushed my ear. "Greater than, when the living forget the dead must find a way to live again." I turned, but the bed was empty. Only a faint imprint remained on the mat. Still warm. Greater than there are souls that never wander far. They stay close, waiting for a heartbeat to borrow. Sometimes, that heartbeat is yours. Chapter 11. The Redemption Ritual. The village lay silent that morning. Even the dogs didn't bark. Mist drifted low across the river, curling like smoke from unseen incense. Madame Nam had sent word the night before. Greater than, prepare for the ritual tomorrow. Bring something of hers, hair, clothing, blood, and the thing that was borrowed. I didn't know what she meant by the borrowed thing until I remembered the small coffin in the locked room. I didn't dare touch it again. But I took the old talisman that had been nailed to its lid. By dusk, the entire courtyard smelled of smoke, rice wine, and river mud. Madame Nam had drawn a large circle of salt and ash on the ground. In the center, she placed 3 bowls. One of rice, one of water, and one of blood mixed with ashes. At the northern edge of the circle, she set a clay pot. Empty, except for a strip of paper that read, "Greater than, return what is borrowed." When the sun disappeared, she began the chanting. Her voice rose and fell like waves. Each verse older than memory. The words heavy, foreign, powerful. I sat behind her, clutching my mother's photo. My hands trembled. The frame cold against my skin. The wind picked up. The candles bent low, their flames stretching toward the ground. Toward the circle. Madame Nam's voice grew stronger. She took the talisman from my hand, placed it inside the clay pot, then poured the bowl of blood and ash over it. The mixture hissed. A smell like burning iron filled the air. Greater than, Tuyat, she called. If your soul still lingers, return to the earth. Leave the borrowed body. Rest. The pot began to shake. The surface of the liquid inside bubbled violently, though there was no fire beneath it. Then came the whisper. Not from outside, but from beneath the ground. Greater than, it's mine. She promised. The salt circle trembled. Cracks formed in the dirt. Thin lines spreading outward from the center like veins. Madame Nam didn't stop. She took a strand of my mother's hair, burned it over the candle, and let the smoke drift into the pot. Greater than, if you borrowed flesh, return it. If you borrowed breath, release it. The wind howled through the trees. The river roared in the distance. Then suddenly, silence. The candles went out all at once. Only the smell of burnt hair and blood remained. Madame Nam's face was pale, her eyes wide. Greater than, it's done, she whispered. She's gone. But even as she spoke, the clay pot began to crack, slowly, loudly, until a single drop of red liquid spilled out. And from inside came a faint, trembling voice. Greater than, you can't redeem what was never returned. The pot shattered. A gust of cold wind blew through the courtyard, and the ashes scattered into the air. Not upward, but toward us. I covered my face, coughing. And when I looked up again, I saw a figure standing at the far end of the yard. A woman in white, hair long and dripping, her face hidden in shadow. She whispered, barely audible, greater than, thank you, for the body. Madame Nam collapsed, clutching her chest. I rushed to her side. Her lips moved, her voice hoarse. Greater than, the ritual didn't release her. It called her back. Greater than redemption means nothing to a soul that was never forgiven. The living may beg for mercy, but the dead, they only want warmth. Chapter 12. The Night of Three Bodies. It began the same night as the ritual. The air in the house grew heavy, almost solid. The candles that Madame Nam had lit were still burning, but the flames bent sideways, as if something invisible was breathing next to them. I could hear 3 sets of footsteps, though I was alone. One heavy and slow, one light and uneven, and one that made no sound at all. The smell of incense thickened, mixing with the scent of damp earth and river silt. It felt like the entire house was exhaling. At first, I thought it was just the aftermath of the ritual. But when I went to the mirror, I saw them. 3 figures. All standing behind me. My mother, her face calm, eyes empty. The man with the bruised neck, staring, mouth slightly open as if trying to speak. And the woman from the river, hair clinging to her face. Dripping water that never touched the floor. They stood still, their reflections clearer than mine. When I turned around, the room was empty. But in the mirror, they stayed. That night, I lay in bed, unable to move. The air around me felt dense, like something pressing down on my chest. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming. Then, the breathing began, slow, uneven, close to my ear. 1 breath, then another, then a third. They weren't in rhythm. Each one came from a different direction. My body grew cold. The hairs on my arms stood up. I tried to move my hand, but it wasn't mine anymore. The fingers twitched on their own, as if someone else was testing how it felt to move through me. A voice whispered from within my head, layered and low, almost tender. Greater than, don't be afraid. We only need your warmth. I wanted to scream, but my mouth didn't obey. Instead, it smiled. The night stretched endlessly. I could feel every movement. My heartbeat, my breath. And underneath them, other heartbeats. Soft and distant, pulsing out of sync with mine. When I tried to sit up, my body didn't follow my command. It rose, slowly, stiffly, and walked to the mirror on its own. 3 shadows moved behind my reflection. One of them, the man, reached forward. And his hand merged with mine in the glass. Our fingers overlapped perfectly. And for a moment, I saw through his eyes. A dark river, the taste of mud, the feeling of water filling my lungs. I tore my hand away, gasping, and the reflection smiled at me. Greater than, you see? We've all lived in this body before. The next morning, Madame Nam found me sitting motionless by the altar. My eyes were open but unfocused. When she touched my shoulder, I spoke in a voice that wasn't mine. Deeper, calm, unfamiliar. Greater than, we're comfortable now. It said. The house fits us perfectly. Madame Nam stepped back, trembling. Greater than, 3 souls in 1 flesh. That's against heaven's order. She whispered. If they don't leave, the body will tear itself apart. I smiled, though I didn't want to. Greater than, then we'll just need another body. Won't we? The smile stayed long after the words ended. That night, I dreamed again. The same 3 figures standing at the foot of my bed. They weren't fighting anymore. They were waiting. When I asked what they wanted, they answered together, in perfect harmony. Greater than, to be whole. Greater than, some hauntings don't come from outside. They grow within. Until you can't tell whose heartbeat is yours anymore. Chapter 13, The Second Death. 3 days after the night of 3 bodies, my body began to change. I no longer felt hunger or fatigue. My heartbeat slowed until it was barely there. When I pressed 2 fingers to my wrist, the pulse flickered weakly, as if it was being forced to move by someone else. My skin grew pale. The cold never left my hands. Madame Nam told me quietly. Greater than, the living and the dead inside you are still fighting. If the body stops breathing, the spirits will decide who gets to stay. She looked me in the eye. Greater than, if it happens again, don't fight. Just let it end. But I couldn't. Something deep inside me refused to die. That night, I sat in my mother's room. The air was still. The candlelight flickered across the old wooden walls. I placed a hand on my chest. My heart thudded once, twice, then stopped. It didn't hurt. It was just quiet. A silence so complete it rang in my ears. I tried to breathe, but my lungs wouldn't move. The world tilted. The candlelight stretched, and the room slipped away from me. Then I saw myself, lying on the floor, eyes open, mouth slightly parted. Still, lifeless. And I was standing, looking down at my own body. Dash dash dash. I heard footsteps outside, and Madame Nam's voice shouting my name. She burst through the door, saw my body on the floor, and froze. Her face went pale. Then she knelt, pressed her ear to my chest, and whispered, "Greater than, no pulse." She began the revival ritual, pressing on my chest, blowing air into my lungs, her lips trembling as she muttered a chant between each breath. Greater than, Nam Mo, Tra Zak Cho Noi, Tra Zak Cho Noi. Her voice broke. Her tears fell onto my face, the face that was no longer mine. She pricked my finger with a needle, let 3 drops of blood fall onto my chest, and rubbed ash from the altar into the wound. Greater than, come back, she cried. If you are still you, come back. Dash dash dash. A sudden flash of light pierced through the darkness. It wasn't bright, more like a faint pulse that came from within the body. And then, a sound. A soft thump, like the echo of a heartbeat restarting. Pain shot through my chest, burning like fire spreading through frozen veins. Air rushed into my lungs, and I gasped so hard it felt like drowning all over again. I coughed, my whole body shaking violently. Madame Nam collapsed beside me, sobbing. Greater than, you were gone for 15 minutes, she said. 15 minutes, and you came back. I looked at her, voice hoarse. Greater than, am I still me? She didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled as she wiped her tears. Then, quietly, greater than, maybe, but your heartbeat isn't the same. Dash dash dash. Later, when I looked into the mirror, I saw my reflection breathing slightly out of sync with me. When I blinked, it didn't. When I turned my head, it followed a second later. Then its lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear. I leaned closer. Greater than, now, it said. I finally get to live for real. Dash dash dash. Greater than, some deaths don't end life. They only reset it. But when the dead rise again, who can say whose heart is beating inside them? Chapter 14. The Man in the Mirror. Since the night my heart stopped, I felt wrong. The world still looks the same. The same house, the same river, the same quiet lane curling through the village. But everything feels one step behind me. When I walk, my reflection hesitates. When I speak, my echo answers first. When I sleep, I dream of watching myself breathe. Dash dash dash. At first, I told myself it was exhaustion, some leftover shock from dying and coming back. But every morning, when I washed my face, the man in the mirror stared back with eyes too calm, too still. I blinked. He didn't. I looked away. He kept watching. And once, when I leaned close, he smiled before I did. Dash dash dash. That night, the rain returned. It drummed against the roof like 1,000 fingers. I sat in front of the mirror, the only light coming from a single candle on the altar. In the flickering glow, the reflection's face looked sharper, its features clearer than mine, as if the glass favored him instead of me. Then he spoke. His lips moved, but the sound came from behind the mirror. Greater than, you've had your time. Let me live now. The voice was mine, but heavier, colder, older. Dash dash dash. The candle flame bent toward the mirror. I watched as a thin crack spread down the glass, a perfect line from forehead to chin. Behind that crack, something darker than shadow began to move. He stepped forward. The glass rippled like water as his hand pressed through, the surface trembling with every breath. Then his fingers broke through. Cold, dripping, colorless. I stumbled backward, but the hand grabbed my wrist. Greater than, don't be afraid, he said. You made room for me once before. I'm just taking what's mine. He pulled harder. The glass shuddered, the crack widening with a sound like bones splintering. I screamed, but no sound came out. My throat locked. My body wouldn't move. Half of him was already through the mirror now. His face identical to mine, except for the eyes. Mine were wide with terror. His were calm. Dash dash dash. When the glass finally shattered, he stood in front of me. Two of us. Same face, same body. He smiled gently, almost kindly. Greater than, rest now. I'll live for both of us. He pressed his palm against my chest. My heart fluttered, once, twice, then stopped again. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was him, turning toward the door, breathing easily. Alive. When I opened my eyes, everything looked the same, except I was on the other side of the mirror. I screamed, but no one heard me. The man, myself, was standing in the room, packing clothes, humming softly. He looked into the mirror, into me, and said, "Greater than, sleep. I'll take care of your life." Then he walked out, leaving me staring from behind the glass, my breath fogging the surface. Greater than, some reflections aren't copies. They're replacements. And when they step out of the mirror, you take their place inside. Chapter 15. Borrowed Life. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows. The rain had stopped. The river shimmered quietly in the distance, and the village woke to its usual calm. People greeted me on the street, smiling, waving. They said I looked healthier, stronger, brighter. None of them noticed that the man walking among them wasn't me. From inside the mirror, I watched everything. He, the other me, moved easily through my life. He wore my clothes, used my voice, even smiled the way I used to. Only his eyes were different. Too still, too clear, like water that hides its depth. When he passed by the altar, he paused for a moment. The candle flame bent toward him, as if it recognized the warmth it once belonged to. He smiled and whispered, "Greater than, thank you for the body." At night, he sat before the mirror again. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of insects outside. He leaned close to the glass, and for a second, our eyes met. "Greater than, you shouldn't look so sad," he said softly. "You gave me this life. Let me live it well." I tried to speak, but no sound came. My palms slammed against the glass, but it only echoed, dull, distant. He tilted his head, the same gentle smile on his lips. "Greater than, don't worry. No one will ever know." Then he blew out the candle. The room went dark. I could still see his face faintly lit by the dying ember of the wick. It was mine, and it was alive. Days turned into weeks. The glass grew colder. Sometimes, I couldn't even see him anymore. Only the outline of a room I used to know. But once in a while, he'd pass by with someone beside him. A friend, a neighbor, a woman's voice laughing softly. And just before leaving, he'd glance at the mirror and smile, as if remembering something. Then, very faintly, he'd whisper, "Greater than, sleep. It's my turn now." At night, when the moonlight falls across the glass, I can still see faint shapes moving behind him. Shadows of others waiting, watching, perhaps longing for their own turn to live. The surface ripples when they breathe. And sometimes, for a heartbeat, I see another hand press up from the inside. Not mine. Greater than, they say a borrowed soul can only live 3 years before it fades. But some learn to live so perfectly that the world forgets they were ever dead. So, if one day you look into a mirror, and the reflection smiles before you do, don't be so sure. It's really you. They say a borrowed body can only last for 3 years before the soul inside begins to rot. But some spirits learn how to live better than the living. How to smile, how to breathe, how to pretend. So, the next time you stand before a mirror, and the reflection holds your gaze a little too long, or smiles before you do, don't turn away. You might not be the only one looking back.
Like and subscribe to Whispering Dark Tales for more chilling ghost stories.